Okay, good. Well done for surviving the last few days. I'm sure that I'm not the only one that thinks it's hot. It's been good in recent weeks in our evening services. Phil has been doing a little mini-series on parables. Although I have to say, everything is a mini-series compared with our series in Luke in the mornings. But I've always loved the way in which Jesus took the ordinary things of life and used them to explain sometimes quite deep spiritual truths. And we've heard that the word parable means laying or casting alongside, the idea that you put something and say, this is like that. And Jesus would tell the story. Often he'd begin, the kingdom of heaven is like, and would tell a story. And I can just imagine Jesus sort of sitting and just being reminded by the things around him. You can, when he's telling the parable of the lost sheep, that he's sitting watching the shepherd bring in some sheep, or when he's telling the parable of the sower, that he's just watching the farmer sow the seed or reap his crop, whatever. But he used these everyday things to tell stories, but not just to tell stories. He would use them as a picture, as an analogy. And tonight I want to look at two well-known examples. I could have the discussion with you whether it's a parable or not, but from Matthew's Gospel as part of the Sermon on the Mount. And I want to turn to Matthew chapter 5 and just a few short verses from Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 to 16, where he's talking about salt and light. It's interesting that all three of the synoptic Gospels record Jesus talking about salt and light, but, the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but each of them records it in slightly different contexts and therefore has a slightly different nuance in terms of the meaning. So tonight I just want to focus on Matthew. So just reading these verses from Matthew chapter 5, 13 to 16. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." I'm sure there are some of us that are old enough to remember Peanuts, the old Peanuts cartoons. And there was a Peanut cartoon that showed Peppermint Patty talking to Charlie Brown, in which he says, "Guess what, Charlie? First day of school and I got sent to the principal's office. It was your fault." And Charlie Brown responds, "My fault? How can it be my fault? Why do you say everything is my fault?" To which he declares, "Well, you're my friend, aren't you? You should have been a better influence on me." There's also another story, the story of a minister working in his garden, building a wooden frame in his garden. And he was hammering in some nails, and he noticed a little boy watching him very intently. And the little boy didn't say a word, so the minister kept working, think he'll get bored in a minute, he'll wander off. But he didn't. Eventually, he got the idea that maybe he was pleased, maybe he was admiring his work. And so he finally went across to the boy and said, "Are you trying to pick up some pointers on woodwork?" "No," said the little boy. "I'm just waiting to hear what the minister says when he hits his thumb with the hammer." Whether we like it or not, we are always influencing people, either positively or negatively. People are watching you. What do they see? We live in a culture, I think, where as Christians we are under scrutiny. People are watching us to say, does this work? What they observe has an influence on them. And so Jesus is talking here about having what sort of influence we have in the world. We recognize these words in Matthew's Gospel as part, as I say, of the Sermon on the Mount. And this sermon is about how kingdom people should live. In the first 12 verses, we have the very well-known verses, the Beatitudes that we know so well. Blessed are those verses that have to do with our personal attitudes and our need of God and our attitude towards God. Then Jesus follows them up by these verses about salt and light, which are speaking about our relationship with others and with the world. So if the Beatitudes describe the essential character of a follower of Jesus, the metaphors of salt and light are to indicate what kind of influence our character should have. It's not difficult to see how Jesus clearly links our inner spiritual attitudes with our outward actions. Do you notice that Jesus doesn't say you are like salt or even that you will be like light? He says you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. This is what we're called to be. It's meant to be who we are, in essence, in our essential character. The word you is emphatic and it's plural. It means you. Jesus wasn't pointing at somebody in particular and saying you. He was saying you to all those who were sat on the mount listening to his sermon. You are my disciples, my followers, so you are salt, you are light. And he speaks of these two things, salt and light. He's using two images that were and still are very basic everyday things, but today they're viewed in slightly different way. For instance, salt in some situations is considered to be an enemy. How many times have you heard say, don't put too much salt on your food? And the doctors will warn us that the number one problem concerning high blood pressure has to do with salt intake. Equally, people these days speak of light pollution. In the culture of Jesus' day, light was very important. They didn't have light pollution that we speak of today. So let's take these two things one by one. Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. When Jesus uses the terms, when he talks about salt, the salt of the earth, in the context of first century Palestine, there are a couple of things that we need to understand, to recognize. Firstly, in Jesus' day, salt was considered to be extremely valuable, and it was a hugely important commodity. In fact, the Greeks called salt divine, and the Romans said that salt was one of the purest of all things because it came from the sun and from the sea, the purest of all things. And it was seen so valuable that it was often used as a currency. So much so that sometimes Roman soldiers were actually paid in salt. It was what was called their salarium, from which we get the word salary. You can write that down, something you've learned tonight. Also, at social functions, a person's worth would be determined where that person was seated in relation to the salt. It's one of those from which we now get the phrase, are they worth their salt? It was a hugely valuable thing. You know, in these days we can go in a shop and we can buy huge quantities of salt for not very much. But in Jesus' day, salt was a very valuable commodity. But of course, secondly, also the heart of the value of the salt lay in what it was used for. In New Testament times, salt was used primarily to preserve and to cleanse. And you can just imagine the importance of such things in a world without refrigeration and without disinfectant. Salt would be a matter of life and death. Jesus says, you know, if salt loses its saltiness, you know, technically speaking, if salt is not salty, then it's not salt. During the time of Jesus, most salt was derived from the marshes or from the rocks around the Dead Sea, and it contained many impurities. And so this salt was a fairly inferior quality, the kind that we buy in the supermarket. But if it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, if it would become spoiled, it had to be thrown out. Because, as Jesus said, it's worse than useless. The phrase thrown out means to be thrown out violently, to be trampled, to be rejected. So it's in the context of this salt being hugely valuable and hugely important in everyday life that we understand what Jesus meant when he said, "You are the salt of the earth." Firstly, not least because salt is valuable and important, it means that Jesus is saying we are valuable and important. That we are, each one of us, created in God's image. We are made in the very image of God himself. We have immense value, each one of us. Matthew later tells us that Jesus says, you know, look at the birds. They don't need a plant or harvest or to put food in barns because your heavenly Father feeds them. You are more valuable to him than they are. You are valuable. You are important. Secondly, it's about influence. Salt had a purpose. Interestingly, there are two substances mentioned in the Bible that are very small yet influential. One is salt, the other is yeast. And they are almost at the opposite ends of the scale, aren't they? One often represents evil, yeast, but salt is different. Salt is a preservative. As I said, in a time when they didn't have fridges or freezers, they put salt in their meat to stop it from rotting. Used in this way, salt doesn't make something good, it just stops something from going bad. Another commentator puts it this way: we who follow Jesus are to be a disinfectant, stopping the spread of evil. We are to be the conscience of the community, speaking out for what is true and right. We are to be salt in our community. We are to be living counterculturally, distinctively Christian lives. We are to be a preserving and cleansing influence in the world. Because the other thing about salt is that it creates thirst, isn't it? It's often, I'm not making any comment about anybody, it is often why you go in a restaurant and they will often have salty food to make you drink more, because they make more money out of the drink than out of the food. Jesus wants us to be people who make people thirsty for Jesus, thirsty for him. Colossians 4:6, Paul writes, let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Unfortunately, someone once said that, unfortunately, when some Christians lose their saltiness, they often try to save the world with pepper spray. It's also important to say that salt just sits in its container, doesn't do anybody any good. As followers of Jesus, we are to be salt in our world through the way in which we live, what we do and say, how we act and react in our homes, in our neighborhoods, in our workplaces, in our churches, wherever. People are watching. People are watching to see if this Christianity thing makes a difference. So we're asked to think about what type of influence we are for Jesus. And he calls us to be people of influence. Are we living as someone who understands that God really values us? Are we using our lives to influence people for good? Are we keeping ourselves salty? So if salt is a hidden but a powerful influence, light, on the other hand, is a visible and revealing influence. It's often associated throughout Scripture with the presence, the truth, the activity of God. It's one of the things right from the beginning, wasn't it, in creation? Let there be light, and there was light, and God saw that light was good. It represents truth and grace. In John's Gospel, it's one of the great I am saying, where Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And here in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says, we are that light. We have that light. And we're told that we catch and reflect the light of Jesus in ourselves. We were once in darkness, but now you live in the light as children of light. So here Jesus says, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. Here Jesus speaks of two sources of light. One is the town or the city on a hill. Those listening would have immediately thought of the towns and cities that were built on the mountains around, of which Jerusalem was one, with the houses constructed often out of white limestone, and these towns glistened in the sun during the day, but could not be easily hidden at night. And they would be visible for miles and miles. The second source is the domestic lamp. Homes back then just had one room generally, which served as a combination of the living, the dining, the sleeping area. And as evening drew near and the darkness fell, a candle or a lamp would be carefully lit and placed on a stand. And it was the only light in the room, so the household would gather around it. And so those who were listening to Jesus, when he said about the light of the world, they would have immediately thought of this only source of light being at the center of the room. And just imagine Jesus sort of tongue-in-cheek saying, well, you wouldn't take it and you wouldn't put a thing over the top of it, would you? And they're all laughing, saying, no, of course you wouldn't. Don't be silly. That's the last thing you do. What you do is you put it on its stand so that everybody gets the benefit of it. So these functions of light help us to understand what Jesus might be saying. Firstly, light, as I say, dispels darkness so that we can see. Light helps to illuminate things. It shows us both what is there and enables us to see things as they really are. Sometimes things in the dark look very different from what they do in the light, don't they? And we can see things. A few weeks ago, I had that experience. We were having some work done in our house, and so Val and I had moved from one room to another to sleep. And I got up in the night, in the dark, thinking I was in one room and I was in another. And I walked straight into the wall. Val woke up and said, "What are you doing?" No, I'm standing there facing the wall. Wandering around in the dark is not an easy thing. But speaking of Jesus, we're told in him was life, that light. John says that life was the light of the world, the light that shines in the darkness. It's a light so we can see, a light that helps to guide the way. So to say, we know how disorientated we can get when we're wandering around in the dark. A city on a hill in the day of few lights provided some important information for those who were traveling, as did the moon and the stars. And so Jesus says, in the same way, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. To let your light shine, it means to beam, to radiate. We are to radiate for Jesus so that people will see or know that what we do comes from him, that we are reflectors of Jesus. That by shining for him, we reflect his light to others so that they can see the way. That they can see the world for as it is. Practically, we can do things that point to him, that shine his light, whether it's be a good deed or act of kindness. The idea is being that people will see God, will see Jesus in all that we do. They will give him the glory. That we share our faith openly, that we live it out in the real world. I've often said, that we live in a world that's crying out for real people to be real Christians in the real world. To shine the light so that others can know the way. Our lives should reflect something more than the world has because we have Jesus. Because he has saved us. Because he has forgiven us. Because he has changed our hearts. Given us hope. Giving us joy. Set our feet on a solid rock. He needs to make that difference. We need to shine the light that points to that. There was a little boy, again, who was on holiday with his parents, and he found that while they were on holiday, that they often visited churches and cathedrals. And when they did this, he was particularly attracted by these amazing stained glass windows. And often he would ask about them. Who's that? Who's that? And when they came home, his Sunday school teacher was asking how his group would describe someone who follows Jesus. And this little boy's mind went back to those stained glass windows, and he said, a Christian is a person that the light shines through. How true is that? We are challenged to ask how the light is shining through us, how Jesus is being made visible in our lives, whether we are hiding it under a basket or whether we're taking out and holding it on high. We are not called to be secret disciples. We are called to be lights held high that burn for him. So, salt of the earth, light of the world, it means that we are challenged to be saltier and brighter as we live our lives for him. Amen. Father, just ask that you might, in these coming days, help us to shine for you.